We're doing bad pairings. This is a fun one. We're doing bad pairings, bad food and wine pairings.
Yeah, no, this is fun. And this is fun in the evil way. I do love it.
Yes.
So it is something that I do in our advanced
really
sommelier, food and wine, that whole semester. Most of it's how to make good pairings, but I do introduce a class on bad pairings. Because there truly are. You really don't realize how bad they can be until you experience it.
Is there a top? Just like a bright line. Don't.
Well, actually, before I do that, you know what I would do is I would actually how to prevent bad pairings from happening and how restaurants do that.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not healthy.
Yeah.
But salt and fats and sugar will hide bad pairings, universally so. Which is why you will see a lot of, even in savory dishes, sweet notes to hide this. Why one of the things we'll always use additional fat, especially butter in dishes. It's a way to minimize chances. It also minimizes the chances of having a spectacular pairing.
I know you say that.
Yeah, because you just kind of dull everything down. That's what all of this does. Especially sugar. You can actually, if you bring up the sugar content of any dish, that's why caramelized onions are so good in dishes. Because that sweetness actually really just, sort of mellows everything out. It's kind of like the Prozac of food. Yeah, it just really, I get that. Or maybe the lithium of food. Makes everything kind of like, Yeah. But, so, and there's certain kinds of wines that will prevent bad pairings, actually. Natural wines with all that high acidity. Wines with a lot of acidity tend to actually, and weird flavors tend to actually minimize bad pairings.
Wow.
Because they tend to be low alcohol.
Sure.
Sometimes we'll have a little residual sugar, even if you don't see it. And those high acids will...
And no oak.
Yeah. Yep. And that flavor profile tends to minimize bad pairings. But there are plenty to try.
Yes.
And my favorite thing is when I teach a class, whether it's food pairing or cheese pairing classes, to the public, I always point out what will be the bad pairings and to try them at the end. And somebody always does.
Yeah.
And somebody always is so sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I always, because they can go really bad. So, well, I've just talked a lot. What any particularly heinous pairings that you've had?
Well, just personally, I just don't like asparagus. But I really, really don't like asparagus with Cabernet Sauvignon. But for some reason, you find it in, nicer restaurants sometimes, or somebody invites me over for a nice wine dinner. And maybe, a lot of the things are beautiful on the plate, but the asparagus will go untouched. If it's paired with Cabernet Sauvignon. I can't do it. It's just really so vegetal and off-putting to me. It's so bitter. I guess if there was a lot of butter and salt on it, it would make it better, but it still wouldn't be good.
No, the butter and salt can only go so far. Put a lipstick on that pig.
That's my biggest. Asparagus is really, really tough.
That does remind me of I had dinner at a friend's house. And this is the hard thing about in our trade.
Yeah.
So this was many years ago, and friends had us over for dinner, had me over for dinner, and it was asparagus and some sort of nut encrusted salmon. And what they did was they went into their wine cellar and came up with their favorite bottle of wine. And I think it was a Zin, but it could have been a Cab. And they poured, so that combination, it wasn't just, because it wasn't just how that green vegetal note.
Right.
There's a specific compound that I don't remember. I think it's a sulfur-based thiol compound that's in asparagus that creates this very acrid note. It's a combination of that. I think it's a thiol with the tannins in the red wine, and that creates a taste that is like a matchstick. Like it's so sulfury, so gross. And then salmon on top of that. And that salmon, and what happens with heavy red wine and fish sometimes, if there's enough iron content in that, I've talked about this in other episodes, it will actually start to degrade. The enzymes in the fish will start to degrade. And so the fats start to actually go rancid in your mouth as you're drinking and eating. And it's one of the most, it was like I was eating like fire and death. It was the worst experience of food. And I had to sit there and smile because they were friends.
I think something else that people do is with salad, they'll, have one bottle of wine for the dinner. Yeah. And that's great. But then for the salad, they'll do like a raspberry vinaigrette or something that's like really, really.
Yeah.
It's kind of 90s, but like what was the classic salad? It was like spinach leaves, raspberry vinaigrette, and maybe goat cheese. Yeah, yeah. With red wine. Yeah. That is atrocious, all of it.
All of it.
So beware of vinegars. Yes. Those are really tough.
Yeah, because vinegars are a specific kind of acid. So no, the acid in vinegars is actually Acetobacter fermentation. Now, that was actually a wine fermentation.
Right.
But that combined with the natural acids in wine is actually such a clash of flavors. And also you just have, it changes the pH, because acid, you have that much acids, it's changing the pH of your mouth. And so flavors all of a sudden become real weird.
Yeah.
So like that dish actually traditionally would work if it was done the proper way, which was it starts with bacon fats, hot bacon fat.
Oh,
you toss the warm, not hot anymore, but warm bacon and bacon fat, pieces like lardons of bacon tossed in with the spinach.
Okay.
And then not raspberry vinegars, but just a little crush of raspberry. Just a little bit, not to make it sweet, not for acid, but just make it a bright notes. And then like walnuts and maybe some few other things. So that's delicious.
That's delicious.
And it's the fat. See there, it's the fat and the salt that actually is going to allow that pairing to work.
Okay.
With the red wine. But even then, I still, if I'm having, like what I don't like is actually a white wine with salad. I think that's, because if they're using acids, because white wines tend to have even higher acids.
Sure.
And those tend to clash.
Oh, okay.
Now, at one point, it might taste a little sweeter, but really what you want to do is you want to just toss with olive oil and salt.
Okay.
And leave the vinegar out. Use the wine as your dressing. Don't pour it on there. Just when you have your salad and then have your wine, you've just dressed your salad. It's delicious.
But generally speaking, you would do white wine with salad.
I personally like that.
But not if you don't want the vinegar.
No
as
vinegar.
Part of the dish.
Right. Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. No other kinds of acidity in there.
Got it.
Just that's it. No. Yeah. That's what I want.
So I remember, I don't know if you remember this. This was a long, long time ago. You did a food pairing class. And in that class, there was, I think you did like a margarita pizza.
Oh,
which is strange. Not something you normally do. But you did that and you paired it with a dry Riesling.
Oh, yeah. That would work really well.
It did, but people did not like it.
Yeah.
So what do you do? That's actually technically a really good pairing.
Yes.
But people are always expecting red wine with margarita. So could you explain why it is a good pairing?
Yes.
And why people might think it's a bad pairing?
Yeah, and this is the funny thing, because one of the things that actually does change wine pairings is expectations.
Yeah.
So back then, and that must have been like 10 years ago.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So, but also back then, people didn't drink rosés either.
No.
Because, and you could serve somebody a bone-dry rosé and they'll swear it's sweet back then. So perception matters so much. It's the same when I've actually told people, and there's studies to show this, you say to somebody, this is a very expensive wine, try it.
Sure.
And then here's a very cheap wine, try this.
Yeah.
And they will always say that the expensive wine tastes better. They can be the same wine.
They can be, right.
And I've done that.
Yeah.
I've done that to winemakers. And we all are, that's a flaw, so our assumptions walking in are really problematic. And that's why people, and I was trying to push that, trying to point out that great pairings can defy your expectations, but they can't if you are just too set in your ways.
Yeah.
So one of the things, first off, for food and wine pairing, you have to be open to try different things and be surprised.
Okay.
Now, there was a bunch of people in that class, because now I remember that class now, because that was a long time ago, but there were people, and there was about maybe a third to a quarter of the people actually were like, that was brilliant. Because they saw it, how good it was, and then everyone else, they realized that didn't get it because they were so stuck in their ways.
Right.
The reason why it's so good is a couple of things about that pizza. One, because a margarita pizza has very little tomato sauce. So we don't have, we only have fresh tomatoes.
Yeah.
And fresh tomatoes, when they're cooked, like your acid levels are very different than a tomato sauce.
Okay.
So, but you also have a lot of fat, because you have a lot of olive oil. And that's that olive oil, that fat, and the salt of the cheeses that are on a margarita pizza that
basil.
And basil. Yep. And the fresh basil, well, the fresh basil is different. They won't help the pairing. Okay. But because it's the salt and the fats. Okay. And the lack of like too much tomato sauce. Okay. That's actually what makes that pairing work. Okay. High acid of the white wine and with the salt, the saltiness of that pizza and the fat of the pizza cuts that fat better than any red wine would. Wow. But then when you add the basil on top of it, the fresh basil at the end, that actually, instead of not just like mechanically making a good pairing, and then it actually adds complementary flavors on top of that. Because that Rieslings tend to have like a very saline, but also a beautiful, they lack a little bit of floral notes. They tend not to have that much floral notes. And that's what basil does. Basil can bring in like these herbal floral notes that float on top and make it a full expression of flavors. Wow. And that's what I liked about that pairing. Wow. It was a unifying whole of a pairing. It was also one that actually people, if they were stuck in their ways, wouldn't appreciate. Yes. And for me, that was very telling. That was back when I was writing my book. And that really helped, see what people are willing to do. Yes. And what, and it changes over time too. What people are okay with changes dramatically. So that's why I'm glad you brought that up. I totally forgot about that. Yeah, yeah. I had that in my pocket. I was reading talk about that. Yeah. So expectations are really important. Oh, they really are. But also don't underestimate white wines. I think maybe the theme we're developing here is a lot of times people, especially people who love wine, can get really excited about red wine in the States and just assume that most people would want to be eating that, drinking that with everything. Yeah. And that's just not true. I really think if you're having people over for a dinner, you really want to make sure you have a white wine on offer. Oh, yes. Because white wine is so versatile and so important to food. You're always going to have, so if the goal is to have just not to have a bad pairing, right? White wine is always the go-to. Yeah. Because it's so easy to have a bad pairing with red wines because of that added component of tannins. That bitter compound can throw a wrench in everything. You imagine throwing it's as bitter as sage. So if you ever take like ground sage, imagine putting a whole lot of ground sage into any dish. Yeah. Is it going to ruin the dish? Sure. It might. That's for me it would. Yeah, exactly. It would for most people because it's so bitter. Yes. One of the things I'll show is, if you want to have an understanding of the bitterness compounds in food, try just put your finger into a little ground sage and taste it. Bitter. Yeah. But that's actually the similar bitter compounds that are in red wine. Okay. So if you think about it, if you can add a whole bunch of sage to a dish and it'll be fine, it'll probably also be good with red wine. Ah, okay. But if it would ruin it, then it's probably not going to be really good. Oh, that's a really good one. Right? Yeah, I like that. And honestly, I just came up with that because I was trying to think like that. I was trying to come up with a simple way of actually talking to folks. That's really good. About why and how bitterness in red wines can be really bad. I love that. So that's how I'm going to, good. I'm going to use that in classes now. I love it. Ooh, I love that. And I would say if you're really just coming up blank, you feel like you're not sure, and you're going to somebody's house or it's a dinner at your own home, just buy a ton of sparkling. Yeah. No. Honestly, a sparkling makes almost everybody happy. It's generally really food friendly. Yes. It's not going to make a great pairing with steak, but you're also not going to have people really upset over a pairing with bubbles. Never. And so a couple of things that I always recommend point out that the things that don't work well is that bitterness.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
if you're having red wine, go with something that's not as nearly as bitter, like that doesn't have nearly as much. So sure, you may like Cabernet by itself. It may not be a good pairing. What will almost always be a better pairing is Pinot Noir.
Yeah.
Especially that Burgundian style or that German style. But that's actually going to work really well. Much better. Lower tannins. Any Sangiovese based wine outside of maybe Brunello, much more delicate, much lower in tannins. That's what you're looking for. High acid, low tannin red wines almost always will work much better. And then for white wines, you can pretty much pick anything. Sauvignon Blanc is always a go-to, but I mean, honestly, we use Sauvignon Blanc in so many of our classes, like training people for Century, that Sauvignon Blanc gets a little tiresome.
Anything that works with Sauvignon Blanc will equally work with Albarino.
Yes.
And more people will be excited and interested to have an Albarino than another Sauvignon Blanc.
That's true. Also, like if you're in the same, like it's in Rueda as well. That's another good. And Rueda, is really like tonally very similar as well. Yeah, that's great.
Chenin Blanc is a great food pairing wine.
Yeah. That's another. Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
White wines, you have more latitude.
Yeah.
A lot more. Just bright, fresh acids, maybe a little complexity, a little minerality. Yeah, and I'm always like, that's where also natural wines, like or an orange wine will come in handy. Like there are skin contact Chardonnays that I love that work in replace of red wines.
Wow.
Yeah, and you mentioned...
It's funny you say that.
Yeah.
I think it's Kevin Zraly. One of his favorite pairings is Chardonnay with a cheeseburger.
Oh, that's great. Absolutely. And not a good cheeseburger either.
Probably not.
No, like
pretty low-key.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, Kevin, I know. Yeah, no. I love him. He's like, specifically, like a McDonald's cheeseburger.
I don't know about that, but...
Well, I like it. I'm a big
do.
fan.
You do. You've brought up McDonald's a couple times.
Oh, I always do. Well, and it's important for food and wine pairing, and also because everyone, when I teach people, people are going to assume that I'm going to be snooty. They also have like expectations that they have to like, but we all have this love of the highbrow and the low brow. Like we love both. It's just the middle of the road that's kind of gross, right? And people like will opt for the middle because they're afraid of the high and they're too snooty for the low.
Yeah.
But I like to point out that like there's great pleasure in the McDonald's cheeseburger. Like there's great, when perfectly made or even halfway well made, that balance of like grizzly meat and pickles and ketchup and cheese, cheap cheese, it is really remarkable. I love that flavor, that texture, everything about it. But equally, I love my freshly harvested white truffles, shaved over eggs. I love that dish.
Yeah.
I love, I love the classic like beef Wellington, but made with porcini mushrooms. And I used to do that dish with porcini mushrooms and elk actually, and it was amazing. A little bit of white truffle on that, delicious. But so high and low. So I want people to recognize that, especially with pairings, you can play around. Like there's a great chef who's actually was the chef of Four Seasons nearby, and he came out like he was the first person to ever develop this. It was like a Philly cheesesteak egg roll.
Oh yes.
And now that's common now. Like you can even buy them frozen, but he was the first one, he was the first person to come up with this. And it was just perfect. It was just hard drugs. Yeah. Deep fried. Yeah. And that was awesome. So much fun. But it takes someone like that to come up with something like that. Someone that elevated to come up with something that down market. And you have to be able to have both. Yeah. You have to, and sometimes in the same meal too. Yeah. Like you can have multiple plays. Don't be afraid to put, and especially people always want to spend too much money on their wine too. I also say, best pairings tend to be you're spending less on your wine.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Like currently, if you're spending $100 on a bottle for dinner, I think you're spending way too much.
All right. Yeah. Good to know.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
I got lots of opinions.
I love the sage. I love the...
I'm glad.
Yeah, that's a really good trick.
I know, and I just came up with that.
I love it.
I just didn't have an easy, quick way to explain it.
Perfect.
Wow, that's
Great.
awesome.
Good
Yay.
job. Well done. Well, we hope everybody enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe.
Even if you didn't like it, if you thought this was the worst thing you've ever seen, like and subscribe anyways. That way I will torture you every week.
Great.
Wouldn't it be nice? Yeah,
Awesome.
my ginormous head haunting your dreams.
Thanks, everybody. Ciao.